My name is Eleanor Matthews, though everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 68 years old, a retired school principal from Salt Lake City, Utah, and 18 months ago, I became a widow. I thought losing my husband, Henry, would be the hardest thing I'd ever face, but I was wrong. Because what came after his death was something I never imagined. Discovering that the man I shared 45 years with had quietly built a fortune worth $53 million. When Henry passed, the world went silent. The hum of the refrigerator, the clock on the wall, everything seemed louder because his laughter was gone. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to open his office door. He'd spent decades running a construction and property development business called Mountain Ridge Builders. And though I'd always known he was good at what he did, I had no idea just how successful he'd become. The discovery came 2 months after his funeral, when I met with his lawyer, Grace Lambert. She slid a stack of documents across the mahogany desk, her eyes kind but serious. "Henry wanted you to have full control of the estate," she said. "He left you the company assets, the investment accounts, and several properties across Utah and Colorado. The total valuation is approximately $53 million. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I remember gripping the armrests of my chair. "That must be a mistake," I whispered. "Henry wasn't. We weren't that kind of people." Grace smiled softly. "He was humble, Mrs. Matthews, but he was also brilliant." I went home that day trembling not from greed or excitement, but from confusion. I had spent 40 years beside that man, sharing one old house, one car, and a life so simple it bordered on plain. We never flaunted anything. Henry always said, "Money's just a tool, Ellie. If you wave it around, you'll only draw the wrong kind of attention." That night, I sat in his old study, surrounded by the scent of cedar and dust. On the wall hung our wedding photo, me in a lace dress I'd sewn myself, him in a suit 2 sizes too big. He had that same crooked grin I fell in love with the day we met. I looked at his picture and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" The answer came in a memory one I hadn't thought about in years. It was after our son, Evan, was born. Henry had been working late, the business just starting to grow. I'd complained that he was pushing himself too hard. He'd smiled and said, "I'm building something that will outlive us both, but I don't ever want Evan to feel entitled to it. He needs to earn his life, not inherit it." Maybe that's why, even now, I understood. He had kept the numbers hidden, not out of secrecy, but out of love. So when Grace asked if I wanted to inform my son about the inheritance, I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "Let him keep seeing me as just Mom. The rest can wait." I didn't realize it then, but that decision, keeping silent about Henry's fortune, would soon protect far more than money. It would protect my son's life, his future, and everything his father worked for. And as I locked Henry's study that night, the echo of his words followed me down the hall. "Never let wealth decide who you trust." If only I had known how soon I'd be forced to live by that advice. 6 months after Henry's passing, my son Evan began to smile again. For a while, it felt like spring had come back into our lives, until he told me he'd met someone. Her name was Ava Sinclair, 29, a pharmaceutical sales representative, originally from Denver. "She's different, Mom," he said, his eyes bright with the same light his father used to have when talking about a new project. "Smart, ambitious, caring. She makes me feel alive again." I wanted to be happy for him. God knows he deserved happiness after the long, hollow months following Henry's death. But there was something in the way Evan said her name, the awe, the speed of it all that made my stomach twist. The first time I met Ava, she swept into my living room like she owned the air around her. Long auburn hair, diamond studs that caught the light, and a smile that felt a touch too rehearsed. She carried a bottle of imported wine and called me Mrs. Matthews, even after I told her twice to call me Ellie. "Your home is so quaint," she said, her eyes scanning the walls, the shelves, the framed photographs. Her tone was sweet, but her gaze wasn't admiring, it was assessing, measuring. Evan, bless his heart, beamed with pride as he introduced her to the little things Henry and I had built together. "Dad built those cabinets himself," he said, and I saw Ava's expression flicker, curiosity replacing charm. "So your father owned... what exactly? A construction company, right?" she asked casually, pouring herself a glass of the wine she'd brought. "Yes," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Mountain Ridge Builders. He ran it for 40 years before retiring." "Must have been quite profitable," she said lightly, her smile fixed. Evan laughed, oblivious. "Mom's always modest about it. Dad was hard-working, but we weren't rich." I forced a small smile. My heart beat steady but slow. She was fishing, and she didn't even bother to hide the hook. Later that night, after dinner, Ava excused herself to use the restroom. She was gone for almost 20 minutes. When she returned, her lipstick looked freshly reapplied, and her perfume seemed stronger. After they left, I walked upstairs to close the bedroom window and found my door slightly open. I always keep it shut. I stood there for a moment, the house silent, and a chill slid down my spine. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the air felt wrong. That night, as I washed the dishes, Henry's voice echoed in my memory. "The wrong smile can cost you everything." Over the next few weeks, Ava began to insert herself deeper into our lives. She called me frequently, under the guise of getting closer before the holidays. Yet every conversation somehow circled back to the same topic: money, investments, property. One afternoon, she laughed and said, "You must feel so secure after Henry's passing. Not many widows can afford to stay in their homes comfortably these days." I set down my teacup and met her gaze. "Security isn't measured by what's in the bank, Ava. It's measured by who you can trust." Her smile froze for just a heartbeat before she changed the subject. That night, I called my old friend Marjorie, who'd known Henry and me for over 40 years. "Something about that woman unsettles me," I confessed. Marjorie didn't hesitate. "Ellie, you've always had a good gut. If she's asking about money this early, it's not love she's chasing, it's a lifestyle. Keep your fortune to yourself." I promised I would. But deep down, a quiet dread had already taken root. Because something told me Ava Sinclair wasn't the kind of storm that passes. She was the kind that waits smiling until the moment she can strike. 3 months after that first uneasy dinner, my son stood in my kitchen grinning like a boy again. "Mom," he said, holding out Ava's hand for me to see, "we're engaged." The diamond on her finger caught the light like a blade. It took every ounce of composure I had to smile. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. When did this happen?" "Last night," Ava answered for him. "Evan proposed after our weekend in Moab. It was perfect. The red rocks, the sunset, it just felt meant to be." Meant to be. Those words should have sounded romantic, but in her mouth, they felt like a verdict. They'd only been dating for 4 months. I thought of Henry, how cautious he'd been about everything. He used to say, "Love is fast, but marriage should never be." I wanted to quote him then, but Evan looked so happy I couldn't bring myself to dim that glow. Still, as I washed the dishes that night after they left, I noticed my hands were trembling. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Evan, who used to drive an old Subaru with duct tape on the bumper, showed up one afternoon in a brand new silver Audi. When I raised an eyebrow, he smiled sheepishly. "Ava convinced me to treat myself. She says I've worked hard enough to look like it." He'd always been the practical one, saving every dollar from his teaching job. But suddenly, he was dining at expensive restaurants, wearing tailored shirts, and talking about investing in new opportunities Ava's friends had mentioned. Every time we spoke, I could feel her influence tightening like a net. When I invited them for Sunday dinner, Ava arrived carrying a bouquet of roses that probably cost more than my grocery bill for the week. "I thought these would brighten the place up," she said sweetly, glancing around my modest dining room as though cataloging every item. During dinner, she steered the conversation toward finances again, smoothly, innocently, but with precision. "Henry must have done well with his company," she said, slicing into her steak. "Evan told me he retired early. That's incredible." "He was a good man," I said simply, "and smart with money." "So you must have a comfortable retirement fund," she pressed. Evan chuckled. "Ava's a planner," he said. "She thinks I should take over managing Mom's accounts when we get married." Ava laughed too, but there was no humor in it. "You know how easily older people get taken advantage of, Ellie? I'd just feel better knowing everything's secure." Something inside me went cold. "I appreciate the concern," I said, setting down my fork, "but your worry is misplaced. My finances are already secure." For a moment, her eyes hardened before the mask slid back into place. Later that night, as they prepared to leave, Evan hugged me. "Ava's talking about a spring wedding," he said. "Just family and close friends. A spring wedding in less than 2 months." After they drove away, I sat in the quiet, staring at the framed photo of Henry on the mantel. "You always said time reveals people's truth," I whispered to him. "I just hope it does before she destroys our son." But time, I was about to learn, wouldn't reveal the truth fast enough, because Ava Sinclair was moving quicker than any of us could imagine. The day Evan told me the wedding venue, I nearly dropped my teacup. "The Aspen Ridge Resort," he said proudly. "Ava's always dreamed of getting married by the mountains. It's the perfect place." Aspen Ridge wasn't a modest venue. It was one of Utah's most luxurious, where weekend weddings cost more than most people's annual salary. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "that sounds beautiful, but are you sure that's within your budget?" Ava smiled across the table, her hand tightening around his. "It's worth every penny. A once-in-a-lifetime celebration should look like it." It wasn't what she said that worried me, it was how she said it, as if she were talking about an investment, not a marriage. When the wedding planning began, she handled every detail with military precision. The guest list grew from 30 to 150 within 2 weeks. She ordered designer invitations, imported orchids from Thailand, and hired a photographer who had worked for celebrity weddings. When she came to my house one afternoon with a spreadsheet of expenses, I could hardly believe the total. "Just under $85,000, she said breezily, sliding the papers across my kitchen table. "We were hoping you could contribute after all. Your family." I studied her face. Calm, confident, expectant. "I can give $25,000, I said, carefully folding the paper. "That should help with what's most important." Her smile faltered. "Only 25? Evan shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I know Dad left you comfortable, and this is our only wedding." I interrupted softly. "Your father believed in living within your means, Evan. 25,000 is generous, and I trust you'll use it wisely." Ava didn't reply, but I saw the cold calculation flicker in her eyes. The mask slipped for half a second long enough to confirm what I'd been afraid of since the beginning. 2 weeks later, she texted me. "We found ways to cover the rest. Can't wait to see you at the rehearsal dinner." The exclamation mark felt more like a warning than excitement. The wedding day arrived under a sky so blue it almost mocked me. Aspen Ridge had been transformed into something out of a glossy magazine. Crystal chandeliers suspended above an outdoor terrace, tables lined with white roses, gold-rimmed glassware glinting in the sunlight. It was breathtaking and completely hollow. When I saw my son standing at the altar, he looked handsome, but there was a nervous tightness around his smile, a flicker of doubt that didn't belong on a groom's face. Ava, radiant in a gown that surely cost tens of thousands, didn't look at Evan as she walked down the aisle. She looked at the guests, the cameras, the attention. During her vows, her voice trembled only once when she said, "Together we'll build the life we deserve." Later, during the reception, her toast made my stomach turn. "I'm so blessed," she said, raising her champagne glass, "to join a family with such strength, love, and stability." Her eyes met mine on that last word, especially financial stability. The guests laughed politely, but I caught my son's quick glance, embarrassed, uneasy. After dinner, I stepped out onto the terrace for air. The mountains loomed dark against the sunset, silent witnesses to the glittering spectacle below. From the open door behind me, I heard Ava's maid of honor whisper, "Are you sure she'll go through with it?" Ava's voice, low but sharp, answered, "Oh, she'll come around. Once we're back from Maui, I'll make her." I froze. My pulse thundered in my ears. Make me? I turned toward the ballroom and watched Ava laughing under the fairy lights, the perfect bride surrounded by admirers. In that moment, I realized the truth. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. And I was the final signature she needed. 5 days after the wedding, I was in the garden trimming the rose bushes Henry and I had planted together on our 10th anniversary. The morning air smelled of earth and lavender. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm until I heard tires crunching over the gravel driveway. A sleek black Mercedes-Benz rolled to a stop beside my old Volvo. From the passenger door stepped Ava, wearing oversized sunglasses, a white designer suit, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. From the driver's side emerged a man in an immaculate gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. I knew instantly this wasn't a social call. "Mrs. Matthews," Ava said smoothly as she approached. "This is Colin Hart, our family financial advisor. We'd like a moment of your time." Our family. I caught the wording immediately. They'd been married less than a week, and suddenly, everything was ours. "Of course," I said evenly, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "Let's go inside." Inside the living room, sunlight fell across Henry's old leather chair, the one I used to picture him sitting in when I needed strength. Colin set his briefcase on the coffee table, snapping it open with a practiced click. "Mrs. Matthews," he began in a tone both polite and condescending, "we understand that upon your husband's passing, you became the sole heir to a considerable estate, approximately $53 million, if I'm not mistaken." The number hit me like a physical blow. That figure wasn't public. Only Grace Lambert, my attorney, and Thomas, my financial advisor, knew the exact amount. "And how exactly did this information reach you?" I asked. Ava crossed her legs, perfectly composed. "Evan came across some of his father's old documents while sorting through storage boxes. He was shocked to see how much his family was worth. Naturally, we started discussing the future investments, property, and the importance of generational wealth." I smiled thinly. "I see. And what does this have to do with me?" Colin cleared his throat. "Given your age and the nature of the estate, we believe it would be prudent and, frankly, fair to begin transferring a portion of those assets to your son and his new wife. A figure of $10 million seems reasonable for their start, along with a modest monthly stipend of $30,000 to sustain their lifestyle." The audacity took my breath away. "And if I decline?" Ava's voice sharpened. "Then we'll have to consider other legal avenues. Colin has informed us that Henry's will could be challenged. Or, if the court deems you unfit to manage the estate due to your age, the assets could be reassigned to Evan as the rightful heir." I stared at her, the woman who had stood beside my son and promised love and devotion only days ago. "You're threatening me in my own home," I said quietly. Her smile dropped. "I'm protecting what's ours." I stood slowly, every inch of me trembling, not with fear, but with fury. "You've made your intentions perfectly clear. This conversation is over." As I walked them to the door, Ava turned, her tone venomously sweet. You can either share what's rightfully family property now, or lose your son forever. The choice is yours. When the door shut behind them, my knees gave way. I sank into Henry's chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his aftershave, and let the rage and grief roll through me. This wasn't about greed anymore, it was war. I picked up my phone and called Grace Lambert, my attorney. Grace, I said, my voice trembling. I need help. My daughter-in-law just threatened to take everything Henry built. Grace's tone was steady. Don't panic, Ellie. They have no claim. But document everything. Write it down, word for word, and don't speak to them again until we have a plan. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made my heart race. The image of Ava's smug smile wouldn't leave my mind. But beneath the fear, something else began to stir, a calm, cold determination. If she wanted a war, she had just chosen the wrong woman to fight. The morning after Ava's visit, I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I half expected to see that black Mercedes again. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Ava. It was Evan. He looked nothing like the joyful groom I'd seen less than a week ago. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled, and his voice cracked when he said, "Mom, can I come in?" I pulled him into a hug. His body trembled against mine. "Evan, what's wrong? You're supposed to be in Maui." He sank into a kitchen chair, running a hand through his hair. Ava said she had a work emergency. We flew back early, but when she left this morning, she was cold, distant. Something's off. Something has been off, I said softly. And, sweetheart, we need to talk about it. He frowned, confused, as I set a cup of coffee in front of him. Then I told him everything about the black Mercedes, the man with the briefcase, and Ava's demand for $10 million. At first, Evan just stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. "No," he whispered. "She wouldn't. Mom, she wouldn't do that." "She did," I said quietly, "and she threatened to challenge your father's will. She said if I refused, I'd lose you." Evan's hands went to his temples. "Oh my God!" His voice cracked. I knew something was wrong. I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. 2 days into our honeymoon, I caught her going through my laptop, the folder with Dad's old company records. When I asked what she was doing, she said she wanted to understand family finances. I brushed it off at first. But later, I overheard her talking to someone on the phone, saying something about hidden assets and unclaimed shares. When I confronted her, she said I was paranoid. I felt my stomach twist. She wasn't talking to a coworker, Evan. She was planning to come after the inheritance. His face went pale. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and started scrolling. "Mom," he said shakily, "you need to see this." He handed me the phone. On the screen were text messages between Ava and someone named Carla. Got him to propose. Wedding next month. Mother-in-law still playing poor, but we know the truth. Another one. Push for house money after the honeymoon. Strike while emotional connection high. And the worst, he's clueless. Once married, half is ours by default. Family fortune, $53 M. Already confirmed through his dad's documents. My hands shook as I read each word. "She knew the exact amount," I whispered. Evan nodded, tears filling his eyes. "She must have found copies of Dad's files I kept in my email. I didn't even think about it." I put my hand over his. "This isn't your fault, sweetheart. She's been planning this from the beginning." He pressed his palms against his face. "I was so blind, Mom. I thought she loved me. God, I even defended her when you tried to warn me." "There's no shame in love," I said softly. "Only in those who use it as a weapon." Evan looked up, his jaw tightening. What do we do now? I took a deep breath. We fight smart. Grace is already on it. She says we have enough evidence to prove fraud and coercion. But you'll have to be strong, Evan. She's not going to let go easily. He nodded slowly, determination replacing the heartbreak in his eyes. Then let her try. She won't destroy what Dad built. Outside, the wind howled through the garden, shaking the rose bushes Henry and I had planted decades ago. I watched my son broken but resolute and felt something shift inside me. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. Because Ava Sinclair might have married into this family, but she had no idea who she was truly up against. That night, after hours of planning with Grace, the house felt heavy with anticipation. The rain outside had turned into a steady rhythm against the windows, as if the whole world was holding its breath with us. Evan sat in Henry's old study, staring at the documents spread across the desk. Ava's texts, the lawyer's card, bank inquiries she'd attempted under his name. His expression had hardened into something I hadn't seen since he was a child facing a bully. I need to confront her, Mom, he said finally. I can't let her think she won. Grace looked up from her notes. If you do, it has to be controlled. We need witnesses. I'll be here. So, we called Ava. Evan's voice was calm when he told her to come to the house that we needed to clear the air about family finances. I could hear the eagerness in her tone through the phone. Finally, she said. I knew you'd come to your senses. An hour later, headlights swept across the driveway. Ava arrived in a flash of perfume and designer heels, confident as ever. Darling, she said, sweeping in like she owned the place. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. Her smile faltered when she saw Grace seated in the armchair beside me, folders stacked neatly at her side. Evan stood tall, his voice steady. Sit down, Ava. We need to talk. About what? She asked, lowering herself slowly onto the couch. About this, he said, sliding his phone across the table. The screen glowed with the damning text messages. Ava's face drained of color. Those are fake. They're screenshots from your number, Evan replied coldly. And Mom's security camera caught you and your so-called advisor threatening her for money. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then, in an instant, her expression shifted from shock to fury. You set me up, she spat. You both did. You think you can trick me out of what's ours? There is no ours, I said quietly. There never was. Her eyes darted toward Grace. Who the hell is she? Your worst nightmare, Grace said evenly. I'm their attorney. And as of this moment, you're being served with notice of annulment based on fraud, coercion, and financial deception. Ava froze, then let out a laugh, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. You can't be serious. You think some old widow and a naive professor can outsmart me? Evan, she's manipulating you. She's trying to keep her precious millions all to herself. Evan didn't even blink. I saw the way you looked at Mom's house the first day you met her. You weren't looking at us. You were looking for a price tag. For a moment, the mask cracked. Her beauty hardened into something almost cruel. You're fools, she hissed. That money will never last, and when it's gone, you'll realize I was the best thing that ever happened to you. Evan took a slow breath. Maybe, but I'd rather be broke than married to someone who treats love like a business deal. Grace stood, placing a folder on the coffee table. All contact between you and my clients ceases now. You'll hear from the court within the week. Ava rose, snatching her handbag from the couch. You'll regret this, she said, her voice trembling with anger. Both of you. Secrets don't stay buried forever. Then she was gone, heels clicking across the hardwood, door slamming behind her, rain swallowing her silhouette as she disappeared into the storm. Evan stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. Then, finally, he exhaled. It's over, he whispered. I walked to him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders. No, I said softly. It's just beginning. Because ending a toxic marriage was only step one. The next step, healing what it had broken, would take far more strength. And for the first time in a long while, I saw that strength returning in my son's eyes. The storm outside faded by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavy. The kind of silence that comes only after destruction. Ava was gone. Yet her presence lingered, like perfume clinging to the edges of a memory you wish you could forget. Over the next few weeks, Grace worked tirelessly on the legal front. With the evidence we'd gathered, the texts, the forged documents, and the video recording of her threats, Ava's defense collapsed almost immediately. She tried to intimidate Evan with talk of spousal rights, but Grace's voice was calm, surgical. This marriage, she told the court, was never built on love. It was built on fraud. 6 weeks later, the marriage was officially annulled. On paper, it was as if it had never existed. But the emotional wreckage remained. For days, Evan barely spoke. He'd wake up, go to campus, and return long after dark. Sometimes I'd hear him pacing in the guest room, the rhythm of a man trying to walk off shame he didn't deserve. One evening, I found him sitting on the back porch, staring at the garden. The same garden where Henry had once taught him how to plant the rose bushes that now swayed gently in the wind. "She almost took everything from us," he said quietly. "Not just the money, but who I am." I sat beside him, resting a hand on his arm. "No, sweetheart, she didn't take anything that matters. You found the truth before she could destroy you. That's strength, not failure." He nodded slowly. Dad would have seen through her. "Yes," I said, smiling softly. "But he also would have been proud that you found your own way out." In the months that followed, something changed in him. The pain didn't vanish, it transformed. He poured himself into his work, mentoring students, writing essays about trust and betrayal in modern literature. The university even offered him a promotion to associate professor. One afternoon, he came into the kitchen holding a folder. "Mom," he said, his voice steady again, "I've been thinking. When the time comes, when I finally inherit what Dad left for me, I want to use part of it for something good." He opened the folder to reveal a proposal for a scholarship program in Henry's name, designed to help first-generation college students in Utah. "Dad built homes," he said. "I want to build futures." Tears blurred my vision as I hugged him. "You're becoming exactly the man he hoped you'd be." And I meant it. As for me, I continued managing the estate quietly with Thomas's help. But it no longer felt like a burden of secrecy, it felt like purpose. Part of Henry's fortune now funded small business grants for local craftsmen and single mothers starting trade careers. Every time a letter of thanks arrived, I could almost hear Henry's voice. Let the money work for people who still believe in hard work. A year after the annulment, Evan brought someone new to dinner, Clara, a quiet art teacher with kind eyes and paint under her fingernails. She spent most of the evening asking about Henry's life, not his success. When she complimented the roses in the garden, Evan smiled for the first time in months. As they drove away that night, I stood by the window watching the taillights fade into the darkness, feeling a peace I hadn't known since Henry passed. The $53 million that Ava once tried to steal had grown not just in numbers, but in meaning. It became the seed of something living. Compassion, resilience, legacy. People say money changes you. They're right, but not in the way they think. Money doesn't change who you are. It only reveals what was already there. Henry had taught me that years ago. Ava had reminded me why it mattered. And Evan, my son, had proven it true. As I sat in Henry's old chair that evening, I whispered the lesson out loud. Not for him this time, but for myself. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the strength to protect what can't be bought: love, integrity, and family. And for the first time in a long while, I knew we still had all three.